ADNA Presents. Today we have Marin Miller joining us. They are a writer and actor. Thank you for joining us, Marin.
Thank you so much for having me, Roy. It's wonderful to be here.
What do you love about audio description?
I'm definitely the kind of person who has a very strong sense of justice. And so when somebody isn't having a similar experience to someone else, an equitable experience, obviously we can't all have the same experience. But if somebody doesn't have access to something in the same way as someone else just because of the way they were born, that really chaps my ass. It makes me so upset. It's something that I only really became aware of through voiceover, and it's something that I've come to appreciate more because there really is an art to it. And I just appreciate that there are people out there who care about folks who are built differently. And I think that's really cool.
I really love how you talk about justice when it comes to what you love about audio description. When you talk about the equitable experience, was there something that happened specifically within voiceover, or was it just something overall in your life experience, or how did that all come together for audio description?
Growing up, my parents were prison guards. Quite literally, my mom was born on Alcatraz or spent the first 6 months of her life on Alcatraz because her father was a prison guard. And so I became very aware at a very young age of power and how power can be displaced when it comes to certain groups. As a child, had no power. There are certain parents that use that to their advantage. So coming out into the real world, I had a very fierce temperament for, things that I didn't think were right. And I started noticing a similar sort of disbalance of power when it came to people who are of a different race than outside of the quote unquote default, who are, outside of the normal ability of physical abilities. And so, I started learning more about those sorts of ways that people are not necessarily taken seriously because of those differences. At first, I really started cluing into the racial disparities between, how white actors were being hired in comparison to black actors. And likewise, I started learning more about how, especially things like, when you learn about disability justice and you realize oh crap, if somebody is severely disabled, they can't have more than $3,000 in their bank account. That's a lot to deal with. That's not an equitable experience. Even if these people are in a movie theater and they have somebody telling what we see as benefits, even though it's really just trying to make the playing field a little more bearable for them, it at least makes me feel good to know that there is somewhere that they can escape. There is somewhere that they can be in their heads and have someone telling a story directly to them. That's really intimate. And I didn't really become aware of that until my husband started doing, he did audio description before me. And he's actually the narrator for all of the new Star Wars films because they wanted a British talent. We would go to conventions and kids would come up to him and, they'd say, my family member is blind and, they were able to watch the Star Wars movies because of you. Whenever I think about these things, when people would tell him, whenever I think about these things, I think of these things in your voice, and that's a really unique and intimate relationship you can have with your audience because you don't quite have that connection that you do with a character, but you are essentially being handheld through a journey by somebody. That journey is, it's written by a person, it's directed, well, okay, the actor, we usually direct ourselves, but at one point it was directed. It's nice to see that in a world where there's so much hostility for so many different reasons, that there is this little community of people that are trying to do best what's right for as many people as they can.
I was not expecting the prison parent
Yeah.
angle to have such an influence. It's so fascinating to enjoy the commitment that you've made, and especially with your husband too. I'm curious if we could explore the writer side of your skill set. I think we've kind of addressed it a little bit with the connection on the voice talent side, specifically with your husband and being able to have that connection with audiences. What about the writing side, your own personal experience, if you feel comfortable sharing anything about that?
I specialize in live action dubbing. Actually, Becoming Karl Lagerfeld just came out on Disney Plus, and I was the writer for that one, the script adapter. it's really interesting, like, I think the crossover between ADR and audio description in terms of the challenges that they both have, because they're both very rhythmically based, like in terms of timing. So really, like, the people who succeed the most in these sorts of industries, I think, have a music background because they have a good sense of rhythm. And when it comes to dubs, like just general dubbing, the challenge there is in live action, okay, how do I match the closed lips and the physical diction of the mouth to English words that have similar diction? And hopefully it looks convincing. And with audio description, you don't quite have that challenge, but you do still have the challenge of, okay, I have this amount of time to get this much information in. And like, what if you have this gorgeous wide shot of this environment and you only have 2 seconds to describe it, you know? Like that's quite a challenge for a writer to just be like, bah, bah, okay, now you know how gorgeous this is. So I really do admire the people who write for these sorts of things because it is a very different skill set. Like I consider myself to be very my strength is in dialogue. I love writing prose, especially like looping mental the spiraling of mental states. But when we're talking about audio description, then it kind of shifts more into a prose based approach for writing, and that's again its own skill set. So, and the funny thing too is like there's one line that my friend I always think of when I'm thinking about audio description and the challenge of audio description. It was from Rise of the Guardians, and there's a part where the bunny, the Easter bunny, he has like a boomerang, and that is what the line was. He has a boomerang, and so he held it up, and like it was like literally like 1.5 seconds that my friend had to say he has a boomerang, and she had to say it like so fucking fast. She could barely get it out, and so we all had to like she was like, watch this. So she sat us all down at a party and we watched the he has a boomerang, and it became a meme for us. Yeah, that's I love the trying to find the best way of attacking those sorts of challenges in this scenario.
That's great. I love hearing the comparison between ADR and AD and the similarities with the overlap, not just on the like you said, the musical background near requirement with that rhythm that's required, but also the bunny boomerang. That's a brilliant story that I'm sure we'll be able to hang on to. What about your experience in audio description itself? Have you found that these things translate in your experience with collaborating with others, or are people kind of isolated and everyone has their own approach?
So far, my experience in audio description is very similar. It's even more isolating than my early years in voiceover, to be honest. And I think like voice acting in general has started to feel more isolating since we've started pushing for more remote scenarios. And not to say that remote is bad. I think there are people who excel in remote scenarios and there are people who excel in studio scenarios. And I'm the kind of person who, can go either way, but auditioning, meeting new people, it's gotten a lot harder to do that in person. Like dubbing for a long time was kind of like that, where it's a lot of us just sort of all independently doing our own thing. And then if we're lucky, we'll bump into each other and compare notes. And that was, in the early 2000s. And now that we're in 2024, and audio description is primarily recorded out of our personal studios, off of proprietary software on our personal computers, or, through a cloud-based platform, it's, I think, much harder to kind of have that sort of network of support unless it's already been built. And a lot of voice actors or groups like Nava are trying to create those community spaces so that people can have more ability to compare, especially for, someone like me, now that I have a very deep sort of aged voice. There are only very specific products that I can do audio description for. Or, in my case, I did a lot of queer-based audio description jobs last year for Pride Month.
In this isolation in your booth with all the proprietary software, that disconnect can have an impact. And I'm curious about if that's maybe one of the challenges that you've had with AD and how you look to maybe an experience that you had to overcome a challenge, maybe not specifically with the isolation, but maybe a general experience of, oh, this was a really hard thing, and then I'm really proud that I did it this way.
I can definitely speak to like feeling insecure in the audio description space, and I think a lot of us can speak to having those feelings because of that isolation, and because it wasn't until I started volunteering with the Coalition of Dubbing Actors, CODA, that I started realizing, like, oh, we really don't work a lot as actors. Like, a lot of the recurring work is just that. It's recurring, it's reprisals, it's work that I don't have to get again. And it takes a long time to build up that kind of base. And so until you have some sort of objective milestone where you can sit down and look and be like, yep, this is my career. I make money off of this. And unless I'm making minimum, X thousand amount per year, I don't consider myself a success. And I think that's kind of our largest barrier, is that, like, and especially in an underdeveloped community like audio description, those bars of legitimacy become even harder to find, because we aren't able to compare notes, like, how often are you working, what are you getting paid. If I didn't have access to other people, I would not have any idea if that was a good or a bad rate. That's not going to pay my bills. So me as an actor, I might be like, oh shit, I guess I better give up. But I'm doing really good as an actor, because the only way to book is just by being in the game long enough for people to get tired of hearing from you. I think honestly, our largest issue when it comes to trying to navigate this space is believing in ourselves enough to communicate openly about the problems that we're facing as actors and as a community, and being able to acknowledge, okay, this is what a good career looks like, this is what a mere career looks like, this is what a beginner career looks like, and all of these are valid. Because there's so much judgment, self-judgment, and we put ourselves down a lot, because I think a lot of us grew up with parents who probably thought we weren't going to get as far as we did. So, but honestly, I think that's what I feel is our largest challenge as a community, is trying to figure out what objectively good and bad is, when there is no objectively good or bad in this sort of space.
And that subjectivity is such a fascinating conversation. I love talking about the nuance of audio description, primarily
Mm.
with the performance of it, but it also seeps into the business side. And it's fascinating. I'm excited to see the voices that are coming up, yours included, to be able to share these thoughts and direction. And with that, what is your dream scenario for where audio description can go, where you want it to go?
Gosh, I think it would be really cool if obviously it was more well known. I think it has started becoming more well known, but like, I didn't even know that, like, movie theaters have those options for subtitles, like little private machines that you can use in theaters for subtitles. And I think they have private headsets that you can use in theaters as well for the audio description. But as far as I understand, a lot of times they don't have very many of those available on the properties that these people go to. So, or if they aren't kept in good enough shape, it can be difficult for patrons to have access to that sort of content. So, and granted, like, it becomes a little difficult to be able to have specific screenings for deaf people, for autistic people, for blind people, because there's no guarantee that you'll have enough people to fill up that kind of theater. But it would be really cool if we did have, like, a, hey, this is the audio description version of the movie. Hey, this is the blind version of the movie. I don't know if maybe like smaller, more private screenings is the way to go for that sort of thing, because I do feel like movie theaters are going to need to adapt to what is happening to the market right now. We just are not really interested in going to movie theaters because they're so expensive, and the experience is so variable because of the other people that are there, or the air conditioning is broken, or maybe the I don't know, phones in the theater. So yeah, I don't know, I think it would be really cool if, like, if not only like more people just knew about audio description, but more people utilized it, because, like, not necessarily in the same way like subtitles have become more utilized, because there's that running joke of like, I can't hear without my subtitles. But I do think that, like, if people were more aware of it, then it would be more invested into, because the blind and the hard of hearing community, they need escapism too. We all need it.
Marin, we've covered so much ground. I'm wondering about anything else that we haven't talked about yet that you'd love to share with our audience.
The only reason why audio description exists in the first place is because somebody along the way saw a problem and decided it needed to be solved. And they were so pissed about it that they talked to hundreds of people and were rejected hundreds of times until they finally found the right people to support their ideas. And they lobbied for those ideas to become reality. And that was probably a fight every fucking step of the way. The problems we're experiencing now, whatever they may be, have been there since the dawn of time, and they've been slowly improved upon since that dawn of time. So if you feel like things suck, you have the ability to change them if you get pissed enough. You just have to make it not even friends. You just have to know enough people who believe the same things that you do. And then you can just reach out and be like, hey, doesn't this suck? And they'll be like, yeah. And then you can talk about like how to deal with it. And sometimes the ideas will work and sometimes they really won't. So, but that being said, like without having the courage to face that chance of failure, nothing will improve. And so, likewise, all of us had to sit down and look ourselves in the face and say, I don't want a regular 9 to 5 job. And that comes with its own set of like scariness and failure and everything. But for whatever reason, those of us who have pursued that path are still doing it. And we're beating our head against that brick wall. And oh my God, the blood is scarlet and it's beautiful. But that we can have that similar kind of drive elsewhere. And for me personally, that's where I find a lot of the meaning and a lot of like the gravity. And that's how I feel like I start understanding the market better. And that is by talking to other people and trying to figure out how to solve these problems. So if anyone listening to this is particularly disgruntled today, I encourage you to spiral out in that gruntledness and see what you can get done. Good luck to all of us.
What a combination of inspiration with reality and practicality and empowerment. How can we follow you? Do you do the socials, websites?
Yeah, I'm Marin M. Miller VO on Twitter, and that's about it. Because I guess I'm Marin Miller VO on Instagram as well. I don't use that one as much, but no TikTok. That gives me anxiety.
Gotcha. Thanks so much for joining us, Marin. Thank you.
Thank you.